Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frances Widdowson, and I was a former professor at Mount Royal University and was pushed out of that university in part because of my challenging the idea that the residential schools were genocidal. And so this event and all the events we've been doing on the residential school files is very near and dear to my heart. And we've been trying to have a number of different events as quickly as we can pull it together, because there are issues that just all of a sudden emerge. And that's what happened with respect to this case, which involves the lawyer James Heller, who was challenging his law society's training materials, which had false information about the Kamloops case, saying that graves had been discovered there. When he tried to change that, get them to change that, he encountered opposition and was defamed in various ways by a number of lawyers and legal organizations. It continues to be false, the information that the Law Society is having in its training materials. And then a few days ago, the MLA Dallas Brodie and Attorneys General's critic put some comments on social media, which just showed her support for Heller and the need to have facts within the legal system. This resulted in another outpouring of outrage from various politicians and other and academics and journalists and so on. And so we were talking, I'm on a research group with many people, including Tom Flanagan, Michelle Stirling, and Shannon Mannion. And we were saying it would be a good idea to hold an event on this particular blow up. And so we're very happy to be able to have that quick turnaround time. And as well, I'm also very happy that a number of people from Powell River are here, which is one of the major bulwarks against the emerging, what I call the emerging totalitarianism, and the residential schools is just one issue. And I will be speaking, for people who are not aware of this already, I'm going to be speaking in Powell River on March 30th on uncovering the grave error at Kamloops, on the book Grave Error, and as well a documentary that I am currently working on about the book and the case, the Kamloops case. And in terms of thanks that I would like to offer, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the researcher Nina Green, who does not get enough credit for what she does. She is an amazing researcher, and everything that these research groups are doing is due to the efforts of Nina Green, who contacted me shortly after the announcement was made in Kamloops. And she has been working tirelessly ever since that day. So hopefully I will be able to meet her one day, because I'm so impressed. And in terms of my activities in Powell River, it's being funded by the Indigenous Residential Schools Research Group, and Shannon Lee Mannion, who is one of the main figures in that group, does great work with the research group. You can find their work, I believe it is irsrg.ca.
That's correct.
Yeah. And there's many articles that are published on that website. And Shannon is a major figure in assisting in making sure that these articles are available. So I asked Shannon to be our moderator this evening, and I will now turn it over to Shannon. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Frances, and thank you everybody for being here. I know for some of us, if you're in Ontario, it's right about supper time, but thank you so much for coming. Tonight, we're going to have 4 speakers, and they're going to be done in the order of Tom Flanagan first, then Michelle Stirling, then Frances Widdowson, and Barry Kirkland. He's going to sum it all up for us. He's in BC, so this is great because he's sort of at ground zero right now. Tom Flanagan, a colleague of mine and all of us from the Indian Residential School Group, is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Calgary. You might also recall his name because he's a co-editor of the best-selling book called Grave Error that he co-edited with Chris Champion. So Tom's going to speak tonight, and I think he's going to speak because this is what he said, but it could have changed because this issue is so fast moving. But he's going to talk about whether or not remains have been found at Kamloops. So Tom, could you please take it away?
Okay, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, so let me come right to the point. On May 27th, 2021, which is now almost 4 years ago, the leadership of the Kamloops Indian Band made an astounding announcement. They said that 215 unmarked graves had been found on their grounds near the old residential school. And they used terms like undocumented deaths, missing children, human remains. They did not offer physical proof, but they made this announcement. They said it was based on a research work of Sarah Beaulieu, who's a junior professor of anthropology in the area. And she had pushed a ground penetrating radar device over this area and had allegedly found these 215 burial sites. Now, this was just think about it for a second. How shocking this announcement is, that there'd be 215 previously unknown graves at a residential school. And the announcement said that these were children's graves of former students. So the Canadian press immediately repeated this story with no qualifications. Nobody asked any questions. The story was just repeated by all media organs, CBC, CTV, Associated Press, on and on and on, without exception of the legacy media. The next day, May 28th, the New York Times, which is the most influential newspaper in the world and the most prestigious, and which does not normally pay close attention to events in Kamloops, but the New York Times published a story which used the term mass grave in its headline. So carrying it even further, because a mass grave term, has connotations of either a civil war or some kind of pogrom in which persecuted people are killed and thrown in a pit. It's a very evocative term. Then on May 30th, which is now only 3 days later, Justin Trudeau announced that Canadian flags would be flown at half-mast on federal buildings until further notice. And in fact, they remained flying at half-mast until the Veterans Day in November. Completely unprecedented in Canadian history. So this announcement came like a tsunami in the media. It just rolled over everything, and there wasn't time to think about it critically. I remember I didn't know what to think. I mean, it didn't seem likely to me, but at the same time, everybody was saying it. And then furthermore, there were 20, I believe, within a few days, a couple of weeks, 20 further announcements from other reserves claiming essentially the same thing, that they had discovered dozens or even hundreds of unmarked grave sites using ground penetrating radar. So an interesting qualification is that on July 15th, a press conference was held and Sarah Beaulieu appeared. She had not been involved in the original announcement. She appeared. She did not present her report as had been promised, that she would present a written report. We've never seen a written report. But in her statement at this press conference, she did enter a qualification that ground penetrating radar in itself cannot determine that human remains have been found. The most that it could do is to locate soil anomalies, that is, disturbances in the soil. But they have to be confirmed by excavation. So the key scientific figure in this qualified the results and emphasized that in themselves they weren't proof of human remains. But by then, the narrative had been firmly established. Nobody paid much attention to Sarah Beaulieu's qualification. And in fact, she has, well, as they say in Argentina, she's been disappeared. She hasn't talked to the media since July 15th. And I'm sure it's because those who are purveying the Kamloops narrative realize it would be embarrassing to put her out there, because she has enough scientific conscience to add this caveat. Anyway, after people had time to think and this tsunami had rolled past, critics or just free-thinking people started to raise questions. Like, how could this be true? How could 215 infants, children, be buried secretly just across the river from the center of Kamloops, and nobody would ever notice it? I mean, who were these children? No children had been reported missing. So who were they? Could it be true that 6-year-olds had been rousted out of bed as was reported by some people, 6-year-olds had been rousted out of bed to help dig the graves? I mean, how realistic is that? So doubts started to arise in the second half of 2021. And then I think the coup de grace to the story was delivered by an anonymous researcher who likes to call himself Kamres, Kamres. And he posted a lot of correspondence he had found in Indian Affairs records about the installation of a septic system at the school in the 1920s. And the septic tiles that disperse the liquids run right through the orchard area where allegedly the graves had been found. So this, in other words, this was a highly disturbed area of soil to begin with. You had digging to lay the tiles. You had further digging later on to plant apple trees. I mean, and there were other episodes of digging there. So I think Kamres, and he does this anonymously because he fears reprisals. He must work for the federal government somewhere. I don't know. But anyway, he's posted very persuasive pieces of information. So I think that any well-informed person should say that there is no evidence of burials at Kamloops. It's not impossible that somebody is buried behind the school, but there is no actual convincing evidence of it. The most you could say is that there are, it's a possibility that somebody was buried back there. But in spite of that, the Kamloops narrative, as I call it, has become established in the media and in a lot of public opinion. And it is still, even to this day, it's repeated by authorities in academia or in the media, in spite of the fact that the Kamloops band itself has not repudiated exactly, but has qualified it. They made an announcement in late May of 2024, 3 years later, at the anniversary of the Sarah Beaulieu's survey. They started to use the term soil anomalies, which would be the proper scientific term to use. And they dropped the explicit reference to human remains. So even those who made the announcement in the first place no longer believe it. And yet you have legal authorities in British Columbia defaming those who ask questions about it. You know, all Mr. Heller asked was that the term human remains, I believe it is, or unmarked burials, I can't remember what the term is in the Law Society's materials. He just wanted to add the adjective potential or possible. That's all he was asking for, which is undoubtedly the right wording. And in spite of that, he's been pilloried by the legal establishment in British Columbia. I mean, this is absolutely astounding when you think about it. We're really in the realm of religion here, that something which has been shown to be wrong is nonetheless being upheld as an article of faith. In the world of religion, yes, this happens. But in the world of politics, in the world of government, this is really unbelievable that this would happen. So that's all I have to say. I haven't followed the ins and outs of the issue. Others who will speak have followed it more closely, but I just wanted to emphasize that Mr. Heller it's rare in politics that you can say somebody is absolutely right and the other side is absolutely wrong. But I'm saying that Mr. Heller is absolutely right and the legal establishment of British Columbia is absolutely wrong. And the more I think about it, the more astounded I am. Okay, well that's enough for me. Let's hear from the other people.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's really informative. That gets us right back down to ground zero, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michelle Stirling. I have a little bit of we're juggling so many screens, it's crazy. Michelle is the producer, writer of a mini documentary by the name of Bitter Roots, The Bitter Roots of Sugarcane, which, as she says, is a mini documentary that debunks the claims of the Oscar-nominated film Sugarcane. She co-produced, researched, and wrote a number of documentaries under the research supervision of Dr. Hugh Dempsey, who was then the curator of the Glenbow Museum of Calgary. She also co-researched and co-wrote a documentary on genocide in the 20th century. That producers decided was too dark to release. She posts articles on these topics on her blog, Substack Medium, and is a contributor to the Western Standard and Troy Media. Michelle, could you please tell us about why you're here?
Well, thank you so much, Shannon. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm here because I want to make a little PowerPoint presentation and discuss some of the things that I found in this amazing book by Ronald Neisen called Truth and Indignation. So I don't want to hold things up too long. Maybe I can just go straight to the PowerPoint deck. There we are. I am screen sharing. Okay. So I'll go through this a bit quickly because I have quite a few slides, but you'll be able to read them more carefully later on Frances' website. So Canada's darkest secret, the myth of missing children at Indian residential schools. So first of all, I would like to say that I do understand and believe that many people do think there are children missing, or they've heard it from their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And I'm going to give you an example here from Eric Bay's book. At the Hudson Bay Trading Post in Albany, a father showed up saying there was no food in the family tent and his wife was ill. The father died. So the Hudson Bay Company sent out men with food only to find the family in a tent, the mother deceased with 5 children around her. A 2-month-old baby was given up to a relative. The 16-year-old joined other relatives on a hunt, and the 3 remaining children, a boy and 2 girls, came to the residential school. During a flu epidemic, the youngest of the three died at the school. So 7 people effectively vanished from that community as a family that day. 2 remained. One was the 16-year-old who would never see his siblings again. The baby, I don't know how it grew up understanding that it had different biological parents or not, but the community would know that those children never came home, and they wouldn't come home because they were orphans now, and orphans were generally not sent back to a community unless there was specifically a family to receive them. So this is interesting because this is the same area of the country that Tanya Talaga writes about the knowing. So there certainly would have been a knowing that people disappeared at residential schools. And of course, since only about 1/6 of all potential students went to, of all Indigenous students or potential Indigenous children went to these schools, there would be lots of people who would be left behind who'd never been to a residential school, and they could make up anything they wanted. So there's 2 items here. One is my report, Ambiguous Losses, where I discuss how this, I think, affects the whole narrative. And the other is confronting the Indian residential school narrative in the media. Those are on my blog. They're free. You can also get them on Amazon if you want to support my work. So let's go on with the presentation. So law societies and activists who want to censor debate are actually violating the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that everyone's entitled to a fair public trial with an impartial tribunal, and anyone charged with an offense is innocent till proven guilty, and no one should be held guilty of any penal offense or omission which did not constitute an offense at the time in the past. So all these people are claiming that Canada is a genocidal nation. I don't think so. Now, Ronald Neisen's book shows the sham of the IAP and the TRC. So he's a very interesting character because he's a law professor and an anthropologist. He's worked closely with a number of Indigenous groups, and I think his book is the only one that actually takes a critical look at the TRC during the time it was being written. And it also includes interviews with some of the priests and nuns, clergy, and former government employees. And it recognizes that they were cruelly cut out of the process. Most people don't realize that. So a lot of these people had dedicated their entire lives to service in the Indigenous communities. So here's the report that we're concerned with, missing children and unmarked burials. Well, this was actually never part of the TRC mandate. And Nisen shows that this missing children episode was developed in secret. And this is a point of important knowledge in the TRC that started with secret knowledge. And interestingly enough, Canada hired a woman who claims to have written most of this report, who was active in the missing children activity with the Mohawk Mothers and McGill University, but who also had her office located on a place that says you're no longer in Canada. You know, so there's been a lot of talk about foreign interference, but that's where Kimberly Murray's office was. And Nisen mentioned several times in his book that he felt the intent of the TRC was to cause national shame. So we should consider that. Now, regarding the 215 unmarked graves, this is Kimberly Murray's sworn affidavit in support of the Mohawk Mothers wanting to do more digging at McGill. And it says right here, the recovery of unmarked burials of Indigenous children at an Indian residential school in British Columbia, blah, blah, blah. That was how Kimberly Murray got her position as special interlocutor, but in fact, that is a false statement. There are no unmarked burials of Indigenous children recovered. There's no list of names of missing children. It's a phantom genocide. Now, how about the independent assessment process, which preceded the TRC and, to my mind, set the stage for how badly this has gone wrong? So Neisen reports in his book that a handful of people tried to present constructive and positive statements at TRC hearings. They were quickly shouted down. He notes that many priests and former workers were afraid to make a public statement at the TRC. Some were afraid for their safety or their lives. That's because of the flawed IAP process. So had their crimes been so heinous? No, they had been convicted in a kangaroo court some years before. So there actually was no due process in the IAP. I mean, I thought that they had like a small, intimate judging session. No, their claimants must prove their claims solely on the balance of probabilities. This means the adjudicator makes a decision based on whether it's more likely or not that the abuse happened, and the only evidence of what happened is the testimony of the claimant. And although in his book he mentions that he thinks that somehow the Indian residential schools were a haven for perps and sadists, in fact, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission only cites some 31 perpetrators who were convicted and served time. Of course, we all wish that number was zero, but living in a real world, there's always going to be some bad people around. But what happened again in the IAP process is that people became identified as persons of interest. So this is actually how somebody got money from the IAP. They said, this person of interest kicked me in the ass. When? 40 years ago, right? So it could be just a sentence to claim that someone was a perpetrator. The accuser was not required to attend the meeting. The person of interest was called a witness at the meeting, not a defendant, and they were not allowed to defend themselves. So, you know, what a crazy process. So something like 5,315 people are alleged abusers accused in Canada, now considered to be persons of interest of potentially serious crimes. And the government actually hired 17 private investigation firms to track them all down. So in my view, and I think this is reflected in Neisen's book, that the IAP fostered injustice. Neisen writes in his book that in one case, a priest was accused of sexual assault of a young man. The accuser was awarded $100,000 based on the adjudicator's probability assessment that the young man was likely at that school, and it was possible such an assault could have happened. But that priest was still at theological college, nowhere near the school. So such an assault based on the evidence could never have happened. So it wasn't due legal process. Another thing that I think many people are not aware of is that leading up to both the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, the IAP, and then the TRC, that there's been flocks of lawyers who are basically ambulance chasing lawyers handing out forms to fill out to make a claim and offering all kinds of lurid suggestions as to, you know, how many times did he touch you and where, blah, blah, blah. So I invite you to read this 2006 article in Maclean's magazine, because I think you'll see that, you know, maybe a lot of ideas were put in people's head for money. And that's exactly what this chief, C.C. Hodgson Macaulay, said. Those 10 years at residential school were the best years of my life. My family says the same. My sister swears by it. And she said they're only reporting the bad side. The more you lie, the more you say it's bad, the more money you make. And the lawyers are making money because they're pushing people to tell their stories. Now, the TRC itself was very selective in their truth telling. They denied and prevented evidence. So it should be noted that $100,000 out of $60 million was allotted for recording and transcribing interviews of the adults in the room who would have been running the schools at the time. This budget was summarily cut to $10,000, and the researchers were told that their interviews would not be transcribed. And if you take the time to read this kiosk carefully, this was at the entryway of hearings, almost everything in this opening statement is either wrong or wildly exaggerated. And here's a voice of someone who was actually there who said, you haven't heard the 7,000 reports that were positive stories. So Thompson Highway in 2015 made this statement. At that time, $2 billion had been paid out. The sum now is more than $3 billion. One of the main things that we're told about the claim of genocide is that based on the United Nations Genocide Convention, which applies to a wartime conflict, not regular civilian activity, we're told that because the children were forcibly transferred to schools, that this constitutes genocide. Except that when the TRC was issued, historian J.R. Miller wrote, at no time in the history of residential schooling in Canada were parents compelled to send their children to residential schools. And Neisen also reports in his book something that is quite revealing. The Holocaust findings were strictly based on evidence, while the TRC reports and IAP payments were based on oral statements or unsupported claims of abuse from 60 to 70 years ago. So he writes that the Nuremberg trials were not a truth commission as we know it, but the prosecutors explicitly wanted to avoid testimony from victims of the Holocaust and to prosecute Nazi officials solely on the basis of material evidence, which they had in abundance. So the unproven claim of mass graves and ensuing moral pain pushed UNDRIP through the House of Commons. Few people realize this, that 6 provinces and several First Nations groups had been pushing back on UNDRIP. They didn't want it to go through without revisions. But within a month, less than a month, of the claim of mass graves at Kamloops, UNDRIP was passed in the House of Commons. The day after it received royal assent, China accused Canada of genocide. What did they cite? They cited the mass graves at Kamloops. And it's interesting in this Al Jazeera story, all the other gory details like children as young as 3, human remains, the most exaggerated things are there. And you have to realize that India and, Iran and China are working together in destabilizing North America and North American culture. So there's a whole geopolitical background there. But I think that this legal premise applies here. False pretenses. UNDRIP was passed on false pretenses. Now, the Kamloops orchard that Tom talked about, here is that drawing from CamRes. You can see the drawing here, as built, the septic field, and this overlaid on the site. This is where the claim is of all these graves found. And so it seems to me that this is relevant, this law, fraud. Everyone who by deceit or falsehood defrauds the public or any person is liable to punishment. The Truth and Reconciliation and unproven mass graves and missing children claims are, in my opinion, an incitement to violence. Church arsons are evidence of that. And I think that many of us who oppose these claims, many Canadians are standing like deer in the headlights, and they're afraid to speak up about it because they don't want to mess up reconciliation. They don't want to be called a denier. They don't want to have somebody come and, burn their car, as happened out in BC. And those things should not be happening in a society where we have rule of law. And I think that this is quite frightening. This is a recent image that's been distributed on social media. Do we want a South African style reconciliation? In my view, Canada has become a lawless nation driven by a false narrative, a blood libel that is not evidence-based. And I think that law societies must cease efforts to silence those seeking evidence and facts that the TRC intentionally excluded while developing the missing children narrative in secret. The IAP findings, based on probabilities, have made criminals of thousands of likely innocent Canadians and allowed false accusers to get away with massive financial rewards. I think that we should repeal UNDRIP. And to end this nightmare, most of all, we must be sorry no more. And if you'd like to read my full article on this, it's on my Substack. Thank you.
Hello, I'm slow on the uptake of getting the mic on. Thank you, Michelle. That was really interesting. You know, sometimes I just want to say, let's get a shovel going out there, but that doesn't seem to be acceptable. Our next speaker is Frances. Frances gave her her introduction at the top of our program, but let me just go over it again. Just to refresh your memory. Frances Widdowson was wrongfully terminated from her tenured position at Mount Royal University in 2021, in part because she challenged the idea that the residential schools were genocidal. She is the author and editor of 4 books, often with Albert Howard, who is on our program tonight, or at least he's not going to be speaking, but he's present, and is a contributor to the edited volume Grave Error. Widdowson is currently producing a series of documentary videos on the threats to academic freedom in Canada. She's working on a manuscript called The Woke Academy and is bringing Spectrum Street epistemology to a number of university campuses. Thank you, Frances, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Michelle and Tom, for your very interesting presentations. What I wanted to speak to you about today concerns the universities, the role that the universities have played in what is happening. And that is largely because of my own experience in the universities, but also because of what I've been seeing happen across the country. And I see direct ties between what's been going on in the university since the 1960s and the kind of impoverished debate that became obvious, was already pretty obvious, but what was happening with James Heller and Dallas Brodie in terms of the discussions about the Kamloops case just allows us to see the ridiculous character of debate in Canada these days. So what I wanted to discuss in this presentation is the truth, what truth is, how truth is now perceived in universities, how this relates to the case of James Heller, Brodie, Dallas Brodie, and what was going on in Kamloops, and then getting into the universities, which I think Sean Carlton is a very good example of the kind of thing that's going on in universities. And interestingly, most people now, most academics have stepped away from talking about the Kamloops case and making accusations of residential school denialism. I think it's because they realize that it's not going to work out very well for them. But Sean Carlton, bless his heart, he just keeps on going on this file. And also Mount Royal University, what happened at Mount Royal University, which resulted in my termination in 2021. And then finally, universities and the legal system, which happens both within academic disciplines, but also in the law schools. The law schools are a major area of research that is feeding into many of the discussions that are occurring. And at the top right-hand corner, there is the title of a article that I wrote on August 15th, 2022, called Relative Truths and Rent Seeking. And this is going to feed into my discussion of truth. What we've seen happen is we have made a transition from truth as being an objective idea to truth being subjective. And this feeds into what is called rent seeking, which are the kinds of demands that are made to divert government funding to non-productive exercises and Indigenous politics is a major area of rent seeking, which was the subject of the book that I co-authored with Albert Howard in 2008 called Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry. That's all about the rent seeking that has been going on for decades in the area of Indigenous politics. So truth, this is an interesting question. If you look up truth in the dictionary, you will have a definition that is a number of different aspects, but basically the body of real things, events, and facts. So reality and facts, those are aspects of truth. And then we also have sort of the religious idea of truth, which is, some kind of transcendental spiritual character of the universe. So, but even that understanding of truth has a sense of universality, that if we were all religious, then we would come to this understanding. Now, of course, we have secular ideas, materialist conceptions of the truth, but still generally when we talk about truth, it's a universalist kind of idea. It's something that we all can share in terms of our striving to understand what the nature of reality is. So in universities, on the right-hand side of the screen is an article by Jonathan Haidt. And what he's got there is the word veritas. It's a kind of a coat of arms for Harvard. Veritas, of course, is the Latin word for truth. And Haidt argues that in universities these days, we no longer have universities who have their telos as truth. And telos is your fundamental goal, the endpoint to which you're striving. He says that many universities these days have their telos as social justice. And of course, what that does is it basically destroys the truth university, because truth that contradicts what some argue is social justice, that will get attacked for being immoral, basically, in the university system. So I have these three asterisks in the middle of the screen that show a separation between what universities used to be about and what started happening to universities in the 1960s. And before the 1960s, the truth in universities were universal. And in medieval universities, of course, the Bible was the source of the truth. And then when we had the Enlightenment in the 1700s, that was the age of reason. So religion began to be critiqued, and we then began to have a materialist conception of truth, which was based upon empirical evidence. And that's one of the main aspects of the definition that we saw earlier, which is the body of real things, events, and facts, that idea. And that's, most people have the idea that, and we saw that in the case of James Heller and Dallas Brodie, is, a discussion about facts being related to truth, and that didn't seem to go over very well in the legal and political realms. After the 1960s, or during the 1960s, this is when we saw postmodernism begin to gain a foothold in the universities, which is the idea that it's the subjective, there's really no objectivity, and it's really subjective beliefs. Everything is subjective, and the truth is socially constructed, so it's determined by language. That knocking out of the objective truth, the idea of an objective truth, allowed activism to gain a foothold in the university. And we saw this in programs such as Black Studies and Women's Studies, and then turned into Queer Studies and Disability Studies. And now, with the Social Justice University, you must affirm, and this is what often is referred to as wokeism, is the demand to affirm the untrue beliefs of the chosen. So we're not exactly sure whose beliefs we must affirm. It's generally connected to having the most oppressed status in a university, but often it's people who are not oppressed, who are somehow aligned with the oppressed, who argue that their views are key to the liberation of the oppressed. Those ideas must be affirmed, in universities. Otherwise, you will be ridiculed, ostracized, and then purged from universities. And that is exactly what happened in my case over the period of 13 years at Mount Royal University. In terms of the relationship of this conception of truth, this postmodern and then woke kind of movement in universities, this has a direct bearing on the Heller, Brodie, and Kamloops case. Initially, the Law Society of British Columbia had in their training materials, this is a direct quote from their training materials, an unmarked burial site containing the bodies of 215 children had been found at Kamloops. James Heller, a criminal lawyer in Victoria, just put forward, along with a person who was put forward a resolution with him, Barry, by the name of Barry, just wanted to put in the word potential, which is true in terms of, facts, making things consistent with reality. When he was defamed in all sorts of ways by the Law Society republishing another argument made by an Indigenous organization, and many lawyers, Attorney General's critic Dallas Brodie stepped in and said that she was going to pursue this with the Law Society, and then said the number of confirmed child burials is 0, which is true. I could not believe this, but I was watching Grand Chief Stuart Phillip on the news, and he said that the remarks of Brodie were absolutely disgusting, repugnant, and ugly. That is shocking. I cannot believe that a political leader of any kind would make such comments. But it becomes clear how this is possible when you look at Leah Gazan, who is an MP, a Winnipeg MP. Gazan came to Pell River on July 20th, 2025. I have a recording of her talk, and I did a transcript of that. And at one point, Gazan said, "I cannot think of anything more violent than someone sharing their story and for somebody to say you're lying. I can think of many things more violent than that. I can think of the death counts in Nazi Germany. I can think of Rwanda, the case of Rwanda, when whole, families were hacked apart by machetes. That's an absurd statement. And for a politician in Canada to making such statements, it's just amazing that this is happening. And this is all due to this woke idea that you must affirm the identities of the chosen or those who are most oppressed. And if you don't, this is some kind of terrible thing, worse than the worst kind of violence that you can imagine. This is what's been happening in the universities for many years and started to really go off the rails in 2020. Okay, so the universities. We have Sean Carleton and Mount Royal University. On the left-hand side, Tim Rowley, who's the president. Tim Rowley put out an announcement shortly after May, it was in June, saying the heartbreaking discovery of 215 children buried in unmarked graves at Kamloops Residential School. I just checked the website this morning. That's still there. The discovery of 215 innocent children. Rowley said that it was up to faculty to console Indigenous members of the MRU community to deal with the grieving process. There's been no retraction made, and that should happen. I don't know how these university presidents can get away with making such massive errors and not having to be held accountable for this. And then we have John Carleton, and this is a blog post that I did on the wokeacademy.info site. And I know Michelle is going to be mad at me for this because Michelle is very, very civil and doesn't like this, but I cannot help myself because Sean Carleton is an unbelievable clown and he should not be taken seriously at all. And he was one of the purveyors of the idea of a mass grave. We have the post that he made about this. And now he's castigating people like Michelle who are saying that there's some kind of mass grave hoax and that everyone's making up the fact that the media were referring to a mass grave. This can't be taken seriously. Anyway, in terms of Sean Carleton, who's at the University of Manitoba, he's been digging in on this for many years. And he recently did an interview with Press Progress, which is a media outlet. I think it has it's either in BC or Alberta. And it's very interesting and there's 2 pages of Carleton's comments in this article, and they only interviewed him. So they say Indigenous leaders and scholars. It's only the quote unquote scholar Sean Carleton who was interviewed. And he's castigating Dallas Brodie for delegitimizing the truths of survivors. But then, very shortly afterwards, he says that there haven't been bodies confirmed at Kamloops. He says this in the article. So, what about the survivors, Dee DeRose and Ted Godfredson Jr., who are both from the Kamloops Band area? On the Thompson Rivers University website, in an interview that they were doing for Thompson Rivers University, both have positions there. They were saying that graves were discovered and that the children being found at Kamloops. So isn't Sean Carleton, isn't he delegitimizing the truths of these survivors? Should he not be accused of residential school denialism and whatever is going to befall people who have to suffer that accusation? So that just shows you how really, you can't really take what is being said seriously. And he seems to be thinking that this is just a minor detail that we're taking issue with, when the whole country was turned upside down in May 2021, as Michelle was talking about. And that was one of the main pieces of evidence given for why Canada was a genocidal country. And we're still dealing with the aftermath of people thinking that 215 children the remains were found at Kamloops. And then we have Mount Royal University, who having the leader of Tim Rowley, and Mount Royal University used to be a great institution in 2008. We had wonderful administrators like Robin Fisher and Manuel Merton. Now, we have, lawyers and bureaucrats and various managers. Anyway, with leadership like this, the academic side is completely gone by the wayside, and we have activism. And these are just comments from 3 professors: Gabrielle Lindstrom, who now goes by the name Gabrielle Weaselhead, Tim Haney, and Milena Razankowska. Weaselhead and Haney talking about murders happening, and Milena Razankowska saying that denying the genocide of Indigenous peoples is the same as denying the Holocaust, which I think is something that the comparison is highly dubious, because we don't have any evidence of mass murder in terms of Canada. We have, children dying of tuberculosis. So how does this relate to the legal system? On the right-hand side, we have an article that was written recently by a professor in the law school at Dalhousie, and it's quite interesting because it's talking about this area of oral history. And I think this is a major, when we're talking about truth and how the notions of truth have changed in the university, one of the major kinds of areas of subjectivity which have come in are this idea of oral histories, which there's a huge difference between the beliefs that Indigenous people have, what was stories which were told to them, and written records, because written records can be frozen in time. So while those records might be fraudulent, while the people who actually wrote things down could be writing things that were incorrect, that historical document of 300 years ago is the same words were written in that time as we're seeing today. That's not the case with oral histories. Oral histories change according to the whole performance aspect of the retelling of the oral history, And so in terms of using oral histories as truth, as a way to strive for the truth, it's a very unreliable source of information. Yet, because of the activist pressure in universities, we now see there's been pressure to see oral histories as having the same validity as written records. And as a result of that, we have many, many concepts which have not been thought about very clearly. And a few of these are Aboriginal title, Indigenous law, and Native sovereignty. And these are areas that I've studied in political science. And there's huge pressure to see those as being equivalent to title, law, and sovereignty as it exists in modern states. This is not the case because Indigenous societies were tribal and pre-literate. And that meant that you didn't have any boundaries. It was fluid in terms of groups moving from one area to another. You didn't have a state, so there was no legitimate authority, and there was no legal system in the sense that we would claim to be laws today, which is rules that are enforced by a state, and sovereignty, which is the highest authority. That would not have existed either. It was just basically whoever was the most powerful group would be able to seize the territories of others with no kind of international state system. And I believe that it's sort of this idea of the subjective developments and the idea of truth, and as well, and allowing oral histories to become entrenched in thinking about Indigenous politics, that has resulted in serious problems of thinking about Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frances. You've certainly described many, many problems with what's going on today. So thank you very much for your presentation. Our next presentation is by Barry Kirkham, and I apologize, Barry, for getting your name wrong initially. It's Barry Kirkham. And Barry is a lawyer who holds an LLB and a BA. Hang on, it's just disappeared from my screen. How does that happen? And a BA from, I'm going down to the, sorry about this. Hang on, it's coming. All right, Barry is a lawyer who holds an LLB and a BA from University of Alberta, where he was the gold medalist in law in 1967. He was appointed QC subsequently in 1985 and was a leading barrister in Vancouver for 50 years. He retired in 2019. Recently, he has authored numerous articles on the Indian residential schools, and he has a chapter in grave error. Additionally, he writes regularly to an email chain of well over 100 people concerning Indigenous issues. And he is one of the mainstays in our 25-member group that keeps going pretty much 24/7 every day, talking about issues and what we can be doing and what can be done about them. So Barry, I don't know whether you've been able to find yourself visible. Oh, you have. Good. I can't hear you.
If Barry can't make it happen, why don't we hear from Jim Heller? We have the man
Yeah,
himself.
Jim's there. Jim's on the
Privilege to have him with us.
Yes.
Hi, guys.
Can you speak for an hour ad lib, Jim?
Well,
All lawyers can.
I thought this was an off watch party. I thought we're just waiting to see what happens with sugarcane.
Yeah, it is.
So I've got to say this. I'll say a little bit, and but I won't say a lot. I want to keep myself in check. We filed our lawsuit on February 4th. The Law Society had 3 weeks to respond. That brought us to last Tuesday. They asked for an extension of time, and we gave it to them. My lawyer, Paul Jaffe's here as well. And so they're going to file the response sometime this week. And they're either going to fork to the left or fork to the right. And that means they're either going to file a substantive reply or they're going to do something more kind of radical and spurious and cynical uh, and because of that, Paul and I have kind of agreed that it's best that I'm not going to make any substantive public comments until I see which way the Law Society tacks. This is going to be a eventually publicly available video, I would imagine, at some point. It's great. Frances, your presentation, Michelle's, yours were great, as was yours, Tom. I only came in halfway through that, but I'm just so privileged to really have the guidance and enrichment from all you guys. And but anyways, so that's kind of it. Can I tell you a little bit? All right, I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you the story up to date, but I'm going to be careful to not editorialize. I read Grave Error. I was alert to a lot of the concerns about the narrative. I thought perhaps in 2023 of even bringing a Law Society resolution because I was aware of the training that as we've seen, flatly states that they're unmarked graves, and obviously that's a real overreach. I didn't do it. Last year in 2024, I noticed the case that came down in the Court of Appeal July 22nd, 24, where an Indigenous woman by the name of Miranda Dick appealed a sentencing that she'd received a year before for contempt of court. And she appealed it on the basis that the judge that sentenced her at the time must have been biased or denialist or something like that, because that judge quibbled with her lawyer over the assertion that there were unmarked graves that were found. The judge, she must have maybe read the TRC because she knew that the word that was safely and properly used, better used, was potential. So she said to the judge, to the lawyer at the time of sentencing, that I think we should use the word potential. The lawyer seemed to agree, but in the moment that happened, the whole courtroom erupted. All of the supporters of the woman that was being sentenced just started screaming at the judge, calling her a denialist, calling her racist. The sheriff said to clean out the courtroom, sweep everybody away. And that lawyer then went to the Court of Appeal a year later. And I thought that it seemed like he had accepted what the judge had said, but apparently not. And he went to the Court of Appeal on the basis that the judge was a racist or a denialist. I would love to see the factums, but we can't see that. They're private at this point. I'd love to see what he actually argued. But in any event, went to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal on July 22nd came down with its opinion, and it's an interesting opinion. It starts off saying this. First of all, it's a ruling by Judge Marchand. Len Marchand is the chief judge of the BC courts, and also in particular the BC Court of Appeal. He was the writing and presiding judge on the panel, and he starts off by saying we didn't really have to take up this appeal. I mean, it's moot. The woman got like a 22-day sentence. It's not all that long. She'd long served it. But he said it's an important thing. I think that we should speak to this. So they took up the appeal. And as I said, he's Indigenous. He's from Kamloops as well, apparently. And he very respectfully, it seems like he really respects the TRC and all of that process. And he carefully delineated how the TRC itself used the word potential. He talked about how the band, at this point at least, was talking in terms of anomalies. And he also offered a useful working definition of denialism, which is something to the effect of an unreasonable resistance to facts. It's pretty simple, right? And on all that basis, he said that there was nothing wrong with what the judge in the lower court had done in the sentencing. She was not a denialist, not a racist, and he dismissed the appeal. So at that point, I thought, God, this is really something. This is so inconsistent with the teaching that we have. And I also thought that maybe the lawyer, it was the same lawyer both at sentencing and at the Court of Appeal, maybe that lawyer had sincerely been beguiled by the teaching because we all have to take this course. It's a mandatory course. I thought maybe that this guy had been kind of misled to think that, well, the course is right, the courts are wrong, and hence I'm going to appeal this. And maybe he had that kind of righteous vigor. Who knows? But in any event, I wrote to the Law Society and I said, you must be aware, and if you're not, you should be, that this is a decision that just came down a few days ago because I wrote them on July 26th. And I think it was a respectful and fairly clear email. And I asked them to amend the training, not a lot. Not, I was asking for a lot. There were two parts to it. I wanted them to add the word potential, but I also wanted them to retract the claim that they had in the training that the band knew this all along. So in other words, there are all these bodies here, and the band knew this all along, implying that shame on the rest of us for not just taking them at face value. Shame on the rest of us for not, I guess, appreciating the sacred knowledge of their oral tradition in any event. So I wrote them. They didn't get back to me. I wrote them again that same day to clarify something. So they get two emails from me that day. You think they'd notice. They promised they'll get back to you within a few days. They don't. They didn't. I wrote them again on August 1st. I said, where are you? What's happening? I've written you these emails. It's important stuff. Again, they didn't get back to me. On August 9th, I wrote them again. By August 9th, something else had happened. Leah Gazan, the NDP member of parliament from Manitoba, had by then tabled her new motion in the House of Commons to have residential school denialism outlawed, criminalized. And, you know, one might think that that's just kind of like a gadfly and nuisance private members bill, but you have to remember that she's the person that got the House of Commons unanimously to sign on to the resolution, I guess, in the House of Commons that what is it that the residential schools themselves were denialists, or that Canada has a tradition, something like that. Anyways, so that was troublesome. And I said to the Law Society, look, in the context of all of this, won't you please answer me? And won't you please just rectify the training? And again, crickets. So at that point, a colleague of mine and I, Mark Berry, we were working on a case together, and so we filed this resolution, and we asked the Law Society, set out all the emails, and asked the Law Society to just simply make that correction, and they didn't do it. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit more what happens. So what happens at that point is that we file the resolution on the deadline. It's August 19th. The AGM itself is going to be on September 24th. And in the interim, the Law Society opens up a portal for discussion, debate under each resolution on the Law Society's website, and they're only for lawyers. So in that portal, there's a lot of debate, as there should be, back and forth, that you might wonder what kind of negative feedback were we getting. This was a common theme. You might be factually right, Jim, but what's your real motive here? Are you just trying to embarrass the band? Or also, we're supposed to be accepting a more consultative process. You're just talking to a bunch of lawyers, Whitey. And so that's not very consultative, and I don't even know where one goes with that. We got some support. Some people really kind of very heartened to see that we'd even brought the resolution. But anyways, there's this kind of debate going back and forth. The Law Society itself put up its own, the executive director put up their own comment that was pinned to the top underneath the resolution saying that, hey, look, nobody ever said that the courses they're not permanent. They're always a work in progress. Nobody said they were perfect. We're very open to feedback, criticism. We're going to look at this. We're going to come out with our next revision by January 25. We're going to address the unmarked graves issue, all of that. They didn't give us a guarantee that they're going to change it. Had they done so, I think Mark and I would have, we actually talked about this. We well might have just withdrawn our resolution. I mean, well, of course we would have. What would be the point of it? But they didn't give that guarantee, and they didn't communicate with me or Mark directly. It's all just there in the portal. So we left a resolution up. Things continue. Um, my wife and I go to Japan beginning of September, and we're in Japan. And on September 9th, the BC First Nations Justice Council came out with their own press release. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's very untempered. It's not nice. And it accuses us of being denialist, racist, horrible things, causing a lot of harm. I think I saw that on that day, but I certainly saw what happened on the next day because it's the next day, within 24 hours, the Law Society put out its own press release. And that's the press release where they, first of all, they linked to the BC First Nations Justice Council um, press release, and they just kind of hopped on the bandwagon. And they called our motion frivolous, vexatious, and unnecessary. They actually were referring back to an effort they'd made a few years before to prevent people like me bringing private members resolutions. So what it takes in law, say you need two people. So I was able to get Mark Berry to do this with me. The law, I brought another resolution about the gender pronoun directives. You won't get into that now, but I brought that in 2021. They imposed these just kind of out of the blue. Everybody had to announce their gender pronouns in court. Um, there was a big effort underway to suppress any discussion about that. There was a young woman who'd written a letter to the British Columbia Lawyers Magazine, The Advocate. The Advocate said, "Okay, we're going to publish this," and they reached out to the transgender activists to see if they wanted to comment as well. And they just threatened the magazine. They said, "If you publish that, we'll ruin you. We'll take you to the Human Rights Tribunal." The editor chickened out and didn't publish the article. So then she went to Canadian Lawyer Magazine. They did publish the article, only to get an open letter from 200 lawyers from across the country, some quite prominent, including 3 benchers from our own law society, threatening Canadian lawyer that if you don't take down that article, we'll ruin you. And in fact, don't not just take it down, but take it down and replace it with an apology for ever posting it in the first place. And if you go to Canadian Lawyer Magazine, even now, and you go to their opinion section and you go back to 2021, you'll see the apology is still standing. We are so sorry that we ever published that article. I wrote to the judiciary and I said, "Hey, you guys, that's not cool." Respectfully, you started something here without any consultation. There are a lot of lawyers who are going to balk at it, and I think what's going to happen is that if you leave these directives up there, a lot of lawyers aren't going to follow them, and that ultimately erodes the respect for the justice system because we have directives in place that people are ignoring. They wrote me back and they told me to mind my own business. And so that's when I brought that resolution. So now back to what happened here. The Law Society, in their press release now on September 10th, they start off by saying, "Look, we tried in 21 to stop this kind of thing. We tried to prevent these vexatious and frivolous and unnecessary resolutions, but we didn't get the supermajority we needed." So they're kind of apologizing right off the bat. And for some reason, they feel compelled to distance themselves from my opinion. They make a point of saying, "Look, the opinion in this resolution in no way reflects our values or our opinion." And whoever said it did. It's a private members resolution. The point is to see how it's voted on. Maybe all the members will reject it. They didn't have to do that, but they did. So they ended up, the coup de grace was, they finished their press release by saying that this resolution just shows, sadly, I can't remember exactly what they said, that there's a lot of racism in the profession that still needs to be rooted out or dealt with. So now I'm in Japan at the time. I work out of a home office. I turned to my wife, and there's nobody here but our cat. And I turned to my wife and I said, "Lori, I fucked up. I sincerely thought that our house was in danger. I was aware of like all the vandalism, the arson that had happened across the country. I thought, shit, we're halfway across the world, and now the Law Society is calling me a racist. Well, what's going to happen next?" Well, I'll tell you what happened next. the portal discussion heated up. So remember back to the Law Society portal? Well, it's now like September 10th, and the resolution, there's still another 2 weeks to go for the AGM. But now people are emboldened. Some of our critics are emboldened, and they start citing the Law Society's press release. You guys, if the Law Society is saying this about you, maybe you should be sanctioned. Maybe you should be kind of brought on the carpet for disciplinary sanctions. And at that point, the Law Society shut down the portal, which one could argue was they were the kind of arsonists that created their own fire and sabotaged the resolution process. One, if the portal meant anything, well, they shut it down. Anyways, um, September 24th, we go to the AGM, and remarkably, before the meeting even starts, we've got 48% of the vote. So all the people that have seen all of the woke Canadian Bar Association, trial lawyers, all these different groups had seen them all lobby against us and say terrible things in the Law Society, of course. They still, so many of them voted in support of the motion. It's such a kind of common sense thing. And then we had the vote, and by the time the vote settled, we had 47% of the vote was in our favor, a whole lot of abstainers. And one thing further I'd note is that even though we were anonymous one to each other in terms of the vote, we all had special codes in order to vote. So the Law Society would know how any individual lawyer voted. So everybody that voted for our motion stepped up. They crossed over the Law Society's threshold, and they still supported us. So what happened next? Well, Mark and I retained outside counsel from Alberta. We thought maybe that was kind of like the safer route to go. We're not dragging a British Columbia lawyer into suing his own law society. Who would ever think of doing something like that? And we got outside counsel to write a demand letter to the Law Society, demanding an apology and asking that they take down the press release. And they hired counsel, and they hemmed and hawed for about a month. And eventually they said no, they wouldn't do it. The most that they would do, check this out. If you go to the Law Society's press release website, even now, you'll see their press release is still up there. They extorted us. They said, if you give us a waiver, say you're not going to pursue us any further, we'll take down the press release. Otherwise, it's still standing. And it's still there now. So then I hooked up with Paul. I love Paul. So great. I don't know if you want to say anything, Paul, but anyways, Paul's a great lawyer. And he's got a relevant history. He's gone to Supreme Court of Canada in the Neufeld case. I mean, I could just talk forever if I started talking about Paul, but I won't. I'll talk about me. So anyways, we filed our lawsuit. And if you haven't seen the lawsuit already, it's available at different places. I'm happy to share it with anybody. And guess what the Law Society did? They started hemming and hawing again. And they asked for an extension of time. And we granted that to them, and we're expecting their answer next week. So like I said at the beginning, I'm not going to say anything until I find which way they go, except for all of that. That's it. That's what I've got to say.
Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
I think Dallas Brodie has graciously agreed as well to say a few words. So that would be fantastic if the MLA Dallas Brodie just said anything that she would like to say about the ongoing controversy.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dallas, and thank you for having this call today. And I just met Jim Heller this past week. A little bit of background on me. I'm literally brand new to politics. I just got elected for Vancouver Quashana in October for the Conservative Party. Talk about trial by fire. This past week has been something else. But when I was alerted to the case and the media story came out, I guess it was Michael Higgins who did the story about James Heller suing the Law Society for defamation. I looked at it with my research people. I'm like, this is really serious. This is a lawyer who's demanding facts at the heart of the Law Society of British Columbia, a place that's supposed to be dedicated to the quest for truth and all the things that come along, the cross-examination, the laws of evidence. Like this goes to the very heart of everything law stands for. And to think that it's somebody, I don't know who these nameless people are at the Law Society, are sitting behind their desks and thinking it's okay to slag a member of the bar and call him these terrible names with no foundation is incredible to me. So, I knew this was going to be a tough thing, but I made the decision that the case demands the attention of the Attorney General of British Columbia. I'm the AG critic there are two of us actually assigned to the AG critic role, and I decided that it was that it was required of me in my office to call this out. So maybe James can correct me on this, but I believe this is the first time the Law Society of British Columbia has been sued for defamation of one of its own members. Is that?
Don't know.
So I posted my X. I've never been a social media person. I've done it. This is probably about the 7th thing I've ever posted. And all of the other 6 were since I've been elected, and I've had people helping me because I've never really been a social media person. But I was given clearance by the head of communications to go ahead. I said, I want to comment on this case. He said, go ahead. And so we did. And the actual post is quite succinct. It's quite sterile even. It's just saying, there have been 0 bodies found and this needs to be dealt with. And okay, so then the figs hit the fan once it went out, and I was asked to take the tweet down. I guess it was Saturday night, late in the night. And I said, well, I'll think about it. And then I thought about it and thought, no. And then I got another call from the party leader asking me to take it down. And I just had it back and forth and said, John, why would I take it down? Like, there's no reason to take it down. He said, well, people are upset. People are upset. So I can imagine, like, when you join a caucus, it's a team of people and everybody's trying to get along. And this is what I've realized is the whole problem with politics. You get in there and you go in there courageous and full of fire, and then you get there and they start working you over. And everybody wants to get along, and now you're going to be a person who's not liked or something. I don't know. So sort of like the Law Society of BC did to James, saying, well, we can't believe he said these things, but, we can't control everybody. It's the very mean thing to do. Oh, I can't believe he said this, oh. And, he gets sort of, oh, we're going to put distance between us and this horrible person. So similar things happened to me this week in the legislature. But the interesting part is that the emails started rolling into me from literally across the country, and they're running at about 99% thank yous. Okay, so we're not talking about even 70-30, 60-40, nothing like that. Not even close. The most vociferous hatred or anger I've received has been from within my own party. Yes, the Christine Boyle across the yes, in the NDP, sure. But I've had people, I guess there's a person in our party who's Indigenous, and she, you know, was super angry and went to town and joined the NDP to call me out. So I've been, I've given a couple of interviews, and I've spoken just like this. I believe that I do know that if we don't have truth, not his truth, her truth, oh, my grandmother's truth, or this whole thing about my truth and your truth, oh, my truth. This stuff has to stop. It's like, it's got to be the truth. Because I mean, I've been in court, I was in court for years, and sure, the judge has to try and figure out, but he comes down to on balance, this is the truth. And it's a really difficult exercise to get to it. But in this case, there really isn't a difficult exercise. The truth is very clear at this point. There may be some digging that actually happens, but actually there's been no digging particularly, despite the fact that millions of dollars have been sent by the federal government and the provincial government to help with the digging. I'll come back to that. But so I've held firm under, the pressure has just been incredible. But I've been bolstered and supported by the beautiful messages that have been sent to me. And I will add that not one message that was sent to me contained vicious comments about Indigenous people, any comments saying, oh, there were never any residential schools. People do not feel that way. People are like me saying, we're not happy what happened there. Mistakes were made. Sadness happened. It was, yes, but this part didn't. And so people are very focused. I've even had people saying, Ms. Brodie, I'm a mining engineer. I can show you how these tools work to show you, like, you can't find a body using something from like detailed letters, some of them sometimes 10 paragraphs long, about how you can't, it's really quite interesting, the heartfelt stuff I've received and the intelligent stuff that's been sent. So here we are, and I've made it through. I'm still alive and sleeping at night, and I'm sorry. And so I just plan to, this week, I have said that I will be taking further steps, and I want to write a letter to the Law Society. I'm going to be writing, it's already drafted, and a letter to Nikki Sharma, the Attorney General. And this needs to be laid at their feet, and they need to act. And they need to decide whether they're going to be in favor of truth or social pressure. And this is going to be an interesting time. One piece I find interesting about what happened this week is it was almost the very same day that my post went out on X, that an article came down from the I don't know which national paper it was, but it was how the federal government had just pulled funding from any further digging. Okay. I forget the number, but it was like 100 and, millions was sent to allow digging by anybody who wanted to dig. And they just pulled all the funding, defunded it. And not even a word. We don't know who made this decision. Who made the decision? Was it Trudeau? Was it who? No names, just funding pulled, and not a peep. I don't hear anybody yelling at them. It's all Dallas Brodie is a horrible, monster. So there you have it. And we'll just see how things roll forward. I know that John did go on the media and say that he'd asked me to take it down, which is true. I did not know he was going to tell the media that until after I was hit with cameras saying, John Rustad told us just a minute ago that he asked you to take it down. I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't, So I said, that's true. And I just dealt with it. But I really feel worried for Canada if we're going to continue to move forward and not have truth as the basis. I actually don't know where this takes us as a society. I'm not, in charge of the country, but in my tiny little piece here, this little tiny piece of the world, I'm going to stand here and say, this has to be dealt with. This has to be dealt with. And I am happy to say that there have been some really good articles written that have been written by very esteemed or powerful journalists. The story has made it onto the Matt Walsh show down in the United States, who is someone who did a piece called What is a Woman? Confronting the transgender activism or radical gender theory that's we've been dealing with. And also a piece by Jonathan Kay, which was lengthy. And he's a brilliant journalist. So I'm grateful to have been able to have dinner with Jim and his wife this week to you know, feel some support and to support Jim as well, because this is not easy to be called these names. It hurts. But then I say, well, you know, sometimes it's not easy to do the right thing. That's all I can say. And I'll take the hits. And I don't know if anybody has questions for me, but that's pretty much where things stand right now. And I have many people in my caucus tucking in right around me and supporting me. And they're, you know, they're standing right with me. So it's not just me standing alone. I will tell you that. They're probably about close to 20 people who have spoken to me and said, we're right 100% behind you. Some people are nervous. I'm learning there are people who are strong when they get in there, but then when they get into the room, they're not all capable of standing up and speaking their strength. And then some people are. And then some people in our party, we've actually brought in some people who, I'm just going to say this, I think belong in the NDP. And that's really weird, but that's a whole other story. Okay, so there we are. Hope that wasn't too long.
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Okay.
A bit long. It was great, Dallas. I'm just kidding. That was great. Pleasure meeting you.
Jim.
You're incredible. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I think you're all incredible, and I hope that let's really work together. And look, the people are behind us, and I even got letters from Indigenous people. It's not just, needs to be dealt with. So I don't know, it takes bravery. And Jim, I think you're incredibly brave. Guts, guts, guts. Yeah.
Anyway, I think we can move on to the question and answers. Thank you so much, Dallas, Ms. Brodie. That's fantastic. We're all behind you. This is crazy. We've been saying it's been crazy for 4 years, so it's coming to a head, and all we need to do is just stand up. And as you say, it's not ordinary Indigenous people. It is the neo-tribal elite and the lawyers and the consultants who form the Aboriginal industry, who are making money off this.
Yeah.
This does not benefit marginalized Indigenous people who are suffering from terrible water, broken down housing, poor educational levels, fetal alcohol syndrome, and on and on and on. So all we need is people with spines who are going to stand up and say, you are not benefiting anyone except for yourselves. So I congratulate both James Heller and Dallas Brodie for standing up to this rent seeking that is going on. Anyway, I'm not sure. Sorry, Shannon, you're the moderator, so I'm sorry for taking over your spot there.
No, that's okay. I was wondering if Barry Kirkham had surfaced.
Michelle, I sent you Barry Kirkham's phone number.
Oh,
an
golly.
email 2 minutes ago.
Okay, I wasn't able to call him. I've been listening raptly to what Dallas was saying, and also Jim. It's so good to have people like really. This is the information coming right from the horse's mouth. There's nothing to editorialize it. It's all there, and so interesting. Thank you so much. So, okay, well, if we start with some questions, I'll call Barry. Thank you very much for sending his number. Yeah, we'll have some questions and answers. I don't know, how did you want to proceed with that, Frances?
Diane, I think Diane is the first one that I've seen with a question. I don't know if there's anyone before Diane.
I don't know either.
Diane, go ahead.
Okay, hi. Yes, I do have a question. It's kind of with regards to John Rustad's media revelation that he had here. So how do we educate the government, specifically John Rustad, after he announced misinformation to the public like this, and I quote, because it's so much misinformation, it just pisses me off. But the reality, so his quote is, but the reality, when it comes to the residential schools in Canada, more than 4,000 children did not return home. They went to school, they were taken from their families, and more than 4,000 children did not return home. Those children died in residential schools, and tragically, as part of this, they decided at the time not to send the deceased home for burial. They buried them on sites, and so just about every residential school in the country has a cemetery, has children who passed at a residential school who have been buried there. So that's just the facts. Now that just pisses me off because I know that most of what he said is misinformation. So my question is, how do we educate John Rustad and make him retract that information when we can, how can we prove to him that what he said was misinformation and make him retract what he said? That's what I'd like an answer to. I don't know, Dallas, if you have an answer for that or not.
One thing I want to say is he is extremely wedded to this 4,000 number. He repeats it to me. He goes, but Dallas, 4,000. He repeats it almost every time I speak to him. And like, actually, John and I, we're okay now. Like, we've agreed, like, okay, you're going to say that. I'm going to stay saying this. And, you know, good on him. He's at least not clipping my wings. But he is repeating this number over and over again. And he has become very, very attached to this Aliyah Warbus, who he made house leader in our party. And she's emotionally, he's gotten right in with all of this. And I don't know if a letter to the caucus saying this is not okay, like getting a large group, like maybe this whole group writes, or people with authority send a letter that's filled with some heavy hitters and say, not okay, not okay. Yeah. This needs to be corrected. You're hacking on Brodie, but really what you're saying is way off base or whatever it is. I don't know. That might be one way. Jim, do you have any other ideas? I think the letter or a public announcement. I don't know.
Well, thanks for asking. I'm maybe naive enough to think that I know that he respects you just from what you told me. Even in the heat of this disagreement, he respects you, and that's why you're still there. One of the reasons you're still there. And I don't know. I'm in town, and you're in town, and Rustad's going to be in town, and if we could have a meeting, that might be cool. So that's one of the things. Wouldn't that be something if Rustad just agreed to have a meeting with me and you? Is that even possible?
Yes, I think so. You mean you, me, and John?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be possible. The worst thing he could say is no.
Won't bring Zelensky.
We won't bring Zelensky. No, he's got bad body language.
But I mean, I think it's just a matter of sitting down. I mean, everybody can move along the spectrum. What do I know? I know someone in Prince George who knows him fairly well, and he thinks he's a reasonable guy. He's obviously, I don't know. I don't know more. You know a million times better than I. But I don't know. Dallas, if he'd be willing to do that, I think it'd be really interesting. If he could see Michelle's documentary, that's just amazing. And I just keep looking. I'm just scrolling for like updates of we don't have the Academy Award yet. I don't think it's going to win. I think the Ukrainian Porcelain War movie is a favorite in all the entertainment media. But nonetheless, Sugar Cane could win. And if anybody here hasn't seen Michelle's expose, The Bitter Roots of Sugar Cane, it's phenomenal. And so it's slightly tangential, but not much. It's like certainly on point. And I don't know, Dallas, if it was possible, I'd be happy to sit down with you and him, go for lunch or something like that. It's just one idea.
Okay, well, I'm heading back tomorrow. I'm there a week. I'm sure we'll be speaking, so maybe I can just approach John about that, and I'll talk to my supporters, like the couple of people who I've met with who have said to John, "Hey, John, like you're wrong on this. Like you're wrong." And but you can see he's really gone down that road a long way. And once you're down that, to
Said
turn
anything
around,
further? Has he said anything further over the past 5 days after his initial press statement? Has he said anything further publicly? I don't know of anything publicly.
no, it's mostly been the Chiefs, and this Sean Carlton guy calling me foul.
Right. And he probably hasn't read my notice of claim either. Paul's excellent notice of claim. I think that's a head turner. I think if you were to read that and he's a reasonable guy, you think, it's pretty tight. Makes
That's a
a
good
lot of
idea.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, go, Paul. Here's a shout out to Paul Jaffe. Good job, Paul, taking these tough cases. So, okay, so that's that question. So or maybe a large group could ask for John, a meeting with John. I think he does things like that all the time. I mean, the Métis demanded to meet with me. Oh, that was pleasant.
I'm just wondering if we shouldn't just send John, Michelle's documentary and just educate him, because he's obviously uneducated in the whole Indigenous issue. So maybe we just need to educate him. But will he listen? Right?
Gotta try. Frances has got her hand up. Thank you, Diane. That's a good suggestion. Frances.
I think it's a much bigger problem than anything to do with one particular individual or political parties. It is about, first of all, the idea of truth being destroyed everywhere. So, and it's not even, I think it was Terry Glavin, and he said it's not even the fact that the truth doesn't matter, it's that no one thinks that it matters, that the truth doesn't matter. Like it's that bad. And in terms of the political parties, they are all pandering to the Indigenous neo-tribal elites and their lawyers. And it's got nothing, as I said, it's part of a huge problem, and that's what I was talking about at the end of my presentation. These ideas of Native sovereignty, Indigenous law, Aboriginal title, there was huge distortions that happened in the academic literature decades ago. And that is all embedded within our Constitution and within all the academic discussions. And it will not work. It will not work because Indigenous societies are tribal societies, and many Indigenous people have integrated into modern societies. But in terms of the nature of the politics, it is about the fact that you have tribal groups who don't accept liberal democratic ideas, and the worst being they have no acceptance of freedom of expression at all, because it is all about.
I don't think I like this person.
What?
I don't like this person.
No, I don't either. So typical university lefty academic.
Well, is she the one who got fired?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I heard.
Whoever's needs to mute themselves. There's someone is unmuted. And you might not like me, but I've got something important to say. And no one's able to say this in Canada today because of the terrible punishments that occur in the university systems. So all we have is people like Sean Carlton who are interviewed by the media. So I think things are in a terrible state across the board, and one political leader is not going to make very much difference in terms of their talking to them. It has to be a much broader discussion.
Was there somebody else who wanted to make a comment or ask a question?
I think I saw Lloyd Robertson has his hand up.
Oh, Lloyd, I'm sorry, I couldn't see the hand. It's a yellow against a blue background. Please go ahead, Lloyd.
Okay, yeah. First, I have a question of Dallas. Is there only one Indigenous person in your caucus?
Yeah, yes, I believe so.
Okay. You
I
see,
believe that's,
sorry.
yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm from Saskatchewan, by the way. I'm a psychologist and I'm president of the New Enlightenment Project. And as Francis knows, I don't want to be a token Indigenous person on anything, because that just feeds the system of identity politics. And so, with regard to something Tom said, he said, I was taking notes. It's all in the realm of religion, and I got to agree with you, Tom, on that. And are you? In 2003, Steven Pinker noticed this, and I just wrote an article where I quoted him, so it's fresh in my mind that in 2003 he noted that there's a quasi-religion, what he called quasi-religion back then, that involved three myths. The myth of the blank slate, which means that everybody can be changed by virtue of the kind of things like their socialization, their culture, the language that they're permitted to use. The second thing he noted in this religion, which is contradictory to the first notion, but hey, when we're talking about religious belief, contradictory things can be held in one and both be held to be true depending on the situation. And the second myth that he talked about was the myth of the that we all have within us a truth that we're born with, and hence, if we're born with a particular gender, we might be misgendered by the doctors and the parents and so on. And the third thing he said was the myth of the noble savage, and that's kind of what we're speaking to here today, is that particular myth. And the myth holds that Indigenous people were living in a kind of paradise, a Garden of Eden, and that was stolen from us way back when, and uh, it goes beyond that because of that. Then the present society is illegitimate and needs to be torn down. And so that's part of what the heck we're dealing with. And so we saw statues of John A. Macdonald torn down. And I got into real trouble on that because I said Macdonald did some good things for Indigenous people. He was pro-Indigenous for his time. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that you're all agreeing with me on that. With regard to Tony Merchant, and I think this was Michelle talking about Tony Merchant, I have something to share. Mr. Merchant's law firm contacted me. This is about 12 or 13 years ago, and asked me to do psych assessments for people with who had gone to residential school. And so I asked about payment. And he said, you'll get paid when we win the case. Well, you lawyers in here know that was perfectly unethical. I can't make an assessment knowing that if Tony's firm wins the case, I get paid. If he does, that just doesn't work. And I agree with Francis that there's a whole power structure involved here, both with regard to people like lawyers and consultants who have made much money off of this, and also from leaders in the Amerindian community and now the Métis community, that there's a whole bureaucracy here that has a vested interest in this particular aspect of this religion, but the whole religion is tied together. So the people from the religion, when we're dealing with a law society here in BC, which I only know by people like Jim and other lawyers who have taken them on in the past, that okay, you might be talking about an issue like the residential school mass graves hoax. You might be talking about that, but all these people who are into gender wang and into the idea of racial what's the word? Racism that is not actually seeable. Only the elect can see it. That sounds like religion to me, too. All of these people, most of whom are white, by the way, will join in. And you're dealing with a whole body of people who, yes, I really like that Dallas has been receiving 99% support across Canada on this issue because it makes a whole lot of sense. But the people that you're not hearing about are organized and they have a vested interest in keeping us down. And that's the fight we're making. And it's not just the elite, Francis, the leaders who are making money off of this. I'll give you an example. I was called in as an elder for the alternate dispute resolution. This is way back when it was operating. And a person that called me in had gone to residential school for 1 year, grade 1. And she couldn't remember who abused her, but she was sure she was abused by a Father Larry. But the Father Larry, there's no Larry associated with that school, and so on. She got $120,000. You better believe that there's a big incentive
Yes.
for people who don't necessarily have a lot of money. Here's their big chance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's not very legitimate, is it, Lloyd?
What's that?
It's not very legitimate. It's not legitimate.
That's right.
Yeah.
And as well, sorry, I just wanted to make a comment in response to Lloyd. It's not something that's beneficial for the Indigenous population either. Although it's nice to have $100,000, if you have no education and your health is poor and you're living in terrible circumstances, getting $100,000, you can guess where that's going to go. And then you're, a few years later, you're back to where you started, feeling embittered because you feel almost like you're a prostitute and none of your problems are solved. So this is just an endless kind of process, which doesn't get at the heart of the problem, which is the terrible deprivation that exists in many Indigenous communities, which money is, you need to have the services, the high quality services, not payouts and, payments to various disputes that are going on. So anyway, do we have more questions? I know we're getting to 6:33. That's what I have.
Can I make a suggestion? I see that Barbara Kay is amongst us, and
Yes,
I don't know if anybody's read Barbara's incredible article, typical excellent Barbara Kay article in the National Post that I think Michael Higgins was first, then maybe Barbara, or the other way around, I can't remember, and then Tristan Hopper. So similar to the kind of reaction that Dallas has gotten, I've gotten the same thing privately, but also these articles have gotten almost 100% universal positive support for our concerns. Now, I don't know where that goes, and I think everybody really really was impacted by your pessimism, Francis. I don't know, what's going to happen. What's the future of mankind? Maybe we should all join Heaven's Gate. But I wonder, would Barbara perhaps want to say something from her vantage point as a journalist at the National Post?
maybe.
Barbara?
You're putting her on the spot. She might not want to speak.
Might not still be here.
Barbara might have stepped away from the microphone, or is she even still on?
I don't think she's there.
Oh, she might have signed off, Jim. I know that Michelle would like to say something.
Yep.
Can Michelle chat, and we'll see where Barbara is. I don't see her on the list, but Michelle, do you want to go ahead? Thank you, Jim. That would have been interesting to hear Barbara. Thank
Hi,
you.
Barry. Are you going to be able to sign in?
Who?
Did you want me to say something or you?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Okay. Well,
No,
I
that-
just, I
that's
had just
brilliant.
with regard to the money issue, I just posted something
Oh.
in the chat, but a colleague who works on other things with me had gone through some of the filings.
Whoever's
You
running
need someone to mute
now
whoever.
has
I'm
your
just looking for
number.
the guy to mute that guy. There we go. Go ahead, Michelle.
Michelle, your microphone's off.
Michelle, go ahead.
Okay. So I just wanted to give you some information from another colleague who, when we were talking about the numbers, like people don't quite grasp what huge numbers are going out there. So the Blood Nation, the Kainai Nation has about 12,000 registered members. They received a grant of almost $850 million from April the 1st of 2024 to March 31st of 34. So that averages about $66,700 per registered member. Another Machiking band in Manitoula Island in Ontario received a grant of $448 million over the period of May 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2025. The population on reserve is about 940 people as of 2019. So that's about $476,660 per person. So if you recall, when Harper was in office, he set up a First Nations accountability law that was repealed as soon as Trudeau took office. And the one thing that I wanted to refer to was, in this book, what Frances was saying about how the ordinary Indigenous people are not benefiting. In this book, Nisen talks about the fact that a lot of the money that went to people went for drugs, alcohol, ridiculous things. And one person even said, well, I used to buy crack and now I can afford real cocaine. So the distribution of these funds in such huge quantities to people who are in difficult circumstances didn't benefit the community or the individual. And as you said, Frances, some of them are just right back to zero. And I think we should also, with the concerns about foreign influence and criminal gangs, I think it's also worth our while considering, what influence might have been put upon people, including threats or extortion, to get them to participate in this, so somebody takes a cut somewhere else along the line. Anyway, I really do recommend that people read this book. Nisen is obviously very empathetic and sympathetic toward Indigenous people, and I would say in a constructive way, but he's also empathetic toward all of the other victims, that being, the priests, the nuns, the clergy, the government paid workers who were simply abandoned by that entire process and vilified and, now live in fear of people like Raymond Frogner gathering up the names of these persons of interest and trying to hunt them down, because I've seen him in a couple of webinars where he seems quite intent on finding out who the persons of interest are and convicting them. Then the whole idea of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was to not ever go there, was to end all the claims. There was something like 11,000 class action lawsuits prior to the IRSSA put in place. So it was supposed to end all of that, but it seems like it's just opened the door for a continuation of it, and now perhaps on a personal scale. So I'll shut up now. I do have to run shortly. I thank you all, and the PowerPoint will be posted on France's website.
Yes, we're at 6:40 right now. So I apologize for all the technical problems. We had very bizarre things happening. Like Shannon's name was on several different people.
Lucky me.
And Barry's brought the problems with Barry. And we never were able to connect with him. So that was unfortunate. And I feel very badly because it would have been great to hear from him. And maybe we can, if he's not too put off by, all the, has difficulties, we can maybe have something, another event where he's able to give his presentation. But I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. It was great having James Heller and Dallas Brodie here. I've been wanting to hear Dallas's some comments from her for quite some time, so that was an unexpected treat. And I really thank everyone. Michelle's presentation and my presentation are available on the website www.wokeacademy.info, or Michelle's will be tonight. A recording of this event will be also on my YouTube channel once I save that and download it. I might edit out all the technical problems. I'm going to have to take a look at how bad it was. But anyway, thanks very much, everyone. And we'll hope to have another event as things break, as different information breaks. So,
thank you.
Thank you very much,
everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.